Regional Planning Committee, righto. Oh, Jesus. Righto, we'll call the meeting back to order, and I'd like to introduce Susan, Michael and Aaron, and from Archives Central, and we'll hand over to you. So, welcome. We'll get everyone seated and quiet, hopefully.
Good afternoon, Chair and councillors, and thank you very much for the invite here today. We have talked to a number of the councillors already at the Archives Central visit that happened a few months ago, so apologies to those if I go over things that you've already heard. We just wanted to give you a bit of background before we started the presentation on Archives Central itself. So MWLAS was formed back in 2008. At that time, the focus was largely on procurement opportunities, but since then we've actually moved into a lot more in the shared services space, and we currently have two specific areas that we are doing true shared services, and that is Archives Central, but also debt management. I guess back in 2008, the main drivers for looking at Archives Central facility was really around legislation, so around the Public Records Act, and also around the compliance issues around that. And the second part of it was really a lot of our smaller councils couldn't afford to actually get themselves compliant and either build their own repository, or they needed office space for staff, etc. So there were some real burning bridges around our MWLAS table, and that's why we looked at an archives repository. Initially, we did look to use other commercial opportunities such as Recall and other records management organisations, but Manawatu District Council then appeared with a facility, and it just made sense to actually investigate that and see whether or not this was something that we could do for local government. And hence, that's why we have our own repository now. We did all the feasibility studies and did all our numbers, etc. So that's kind of where it came about. And one of the focus really was around getting our communities to be able to access their archives online. Because probably like some of you, apart from Hawke's Bay Regional Council who are now in the facility, but a lot of the archives couldn't be accessible. They could be discoverable, and that was through either staff searching or through coming into a facility themselves or to your councils and looking. So this way it made them available for them online at home. Come to our facility. We've got two archivists that provide that support, which is Michael and Aaron, and they do a lot of the searching for staff but also for our communities as well. Initially we probably had 1 or 2 requests coming through a week. Our website has had over 2,000 hits over the last 2 years, so it's had a significant increase in interest from all of our communities and also from our staff as well. So we're really excited to have Hawke's Bay Regional Council involved in the facility and also on our database. And one of our long-term vision for local government is actually to be the local government, not so much the repository, just because of distance, but more so around the database itself. If we could have one source where all of local authority archives are listed and described, what a great service that's providing our community. So that was one of our longer term focuses. So we've probably been in the facility now since 2010, and the chaps, Michael and Aaron, are going to take you through that. But it's been a really invaluable service for a number of our council staff. They've spent many hours searching and looking for records, which they've now been able to just give Michael a call, give them what they're wanting, and within that day they get the information turned around and back to them. So that's been a real time saver for our staff. In terms of Hawke's Bay Regional Council, we have 70 linear metres of information in our repository, but also we have that on our database as well. We're working with Carl from Paul's team, and he's identified some additional archives that have yet to come through. So it's really exciting to have you guys on board and to be involved. So that's really all I had to say. I've said a few times. It is one of a kind. We are the only one in New Zealand that has a shared service opportunity around archives as well. So that's pretty exciting for us too. I'm going to hand over to Michael and he'll take you through the database itself.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, so I will give you, thank you, a quick run through of how the archives are stored and accessed at Archive Central, as well as give you a quick run through on the database and what that looks like. So the storage was designed to meet the mandatory requirements issued by Archives New Zealand around humidity and temperature control for records. Those standards have been set to ensure that paper will last as long as it can, really. Being kept in a mezzanine floor or attic or something like that usually isn't so good for paper. The repository walls and ceiling are all insulated, and the environmental conditions are all monitored by data loggers, so we do know if there are any major spikes in temperature or anything else. And that insulation does actually prevent any major changes in the environment. When we fitted out and upgraded the building, it was strengthened to 100% of the building code for earthquake strengthening. The repository itself only actually takes up about 40% of the total building. So that means we essentially have plenty of space for future expansion. And when we set up the shelving units, we did a mix of static and mobile. So again, we have the ability to actually convert the static shelving to mobile, fitting in more shelving into the current space we have. So, we want to make the archives available to people regardless of where they're located. This was quite an important part of the project from the beginning, given the Horizons region, which is what we started with, is actually quite a large area, from Taramanui down through to Levin. So it wasn't practical at all to expect people to be able to come into Fielding to view the archives every time they wanted to see something. So as a result, we've got a lot of scanning equipment, which means that we can scan just about anything, and that's from great big old rate book bound volumes, correspondence files, through to photographs, photographic negatives and things like that. The few things that we can't do in-house, there are outside companies that can do that work for us. And we're progressively scanning the archives of that are in particular high use or high demand. Our main focus at the moment is around the council rate books, as they're quite heavily used by genealogists, people doing family history research. And we've already done these for set dates for 3 of the councils. And that's been a big help for our regular users. In fact, there are some people that we saw quite regularly at the start when we opened that we just don't see anymore. They just use the online versions. And council staff and members of the public, of course, can actually come in and see us in person during our opening hours. The hours themselves are in the afternoons during the week, but we're pretty flexible with that, and we do make appointments for people outside our normal opening hours. The requests vary hugely from family historians through to people who are researching Treaty Waitangi claims. And I know some of the professional researchers have really appreciated the services we've been able to offer to them. About half our requests come from council staff themselves doing work-related research, and we spend quite a lot of time doing work for them. A request can vary anywhere from about 10 minutes through to 10 or 12 hours work in some cases. And we also have a variety of ways of actually delivering the information to council staff. So we can add them items to the website and just send them a link. We can email it to them if the file's not too large. We even use Dropbox for larger files, as well as posting out USB sticks, things like that. We're pretty flexible, and we just go with whatever people need. We also employ a part-time advisor to provide advice and support to councils on protecting their born digital information. So born digital information is exactly that. It's never existed in paper. It only exists in a digital format. And those are essentially going to be the archives of the future. So the directors felt there was a need for this role because, unlike the physical archives, digital information is at particular risk from loss. be it file formats becoming obsolete or even, say, old floppy disks, things like that. So the staff members have been working on discovering good practice and guidelines and standards, and has also carried out health checks with councils on their systems, and has also provided advice on other projects as needed. They've also done a lot of work with an Algam working group in terms of finding solutions for the sector, because we know it's not just our councils that have these problems or potential issues for the future. And then there's the website, which I've mentioned several times. It was officially launched on December 2010, initially for 7 councils, and we initially started off with just listings for 2 of those. So it's gradually grown, and the Ruapehu district joined up a couple of years ago, and yourselves, of course, who joined up this year. So we now have a total of 9 councils in there, which is pretty impressive, really.
I hope they've updated your car since then.
It's actually taken a Raffles Street, that photo.
Yes. So,
Not about us.
yep. The Cashman Board was doing an investigation into radio, mobile radios. So we'll just leap into the database itself. So this primarily serves as a catalogue of the archives. As we scan items, we do add them on here, but the number of items that have been scanned are still a tiny percentage of everything that's been catalogued. And we can attach a variety of formats, so pictures, documents, PDFs, through to audio and video files as well. So it's fairly adaptable. We follow international best practice in describing the archives, use what's known as the series system for it, and it's all around how the records were originally created and used. And the reason why we do that is it provides important context for the records and makes it easier to then find the right things for people searching. So each council has its own section, and it's possible to search within just one of these sections or over the entire database. And that's quite useful where councils hold material that relate to neighbours. We've found several cases where rare or unusual maps for one council's area are actually held by a completely different district. Getting to the council section is as easy as clicking the logo you want.
Excuse me, sorry.
Can we ask a
Councillor.
question?
Sorry.
Can anyone get into anyone's, can someone from Horizon go into our one? And
Yep.
do it? So it looks at
Yep.
anyone.
This is all just publicly available over the internet. In the case, like, there are occasionally restricted records, they obviously wouldn't be made available on here, and we'd have to assess whether or not they can even be made, the catalogue can even be made available. It depends on the records. Yeah, so each section has its own front page like this. Gives a little bit of detail about the council's history and the types of archives available. For the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, we hold the surviving minute books of the council and all the former boards that operated in the area. The earliest dates back to 1877. As well as the Regional Council administration files for 1989 through to 2002, and an assortment of other records. We're doing some work at the moment with Carl Olsen in identifying other archives that are held for potential transfer. There's a lot of catchment board files and things like that still to sort out.
So, it's all held digitally. What's the security? What if someone gets in there and wipes the whole lot? What security do you have?
Well, it's backed up. Believe there's a daily backup as well as a weekly and a monthly backup.
Okay,
So
that's
there's-
held separately.
Yes, so there's redundancy there. So searching is as easy to do as using where it says search at the top right, strangely enough. There's also an option for a more advanced search, which allows you to restrict details down, search by date, things like that. But if we just browse everything,
So the search engine, sorry Michael,
Oh,
allows
sorry.
you to search across all of the councils, or you can limit it just to Hawke's Bay Regional Council. So
Yeah.
it's quite a useful tool.
Yep. So we've got 1,119 entries for the Hawke's Bay Regional Council at the moment. We've also got 10 images scanned, 1 video and 14 documents. If we have a look at the images. And if we just select one of those, these entries are all linked through to the other layers of description, and also in the case of the scanned items, you can view them online. The maps are actually done to a higher resolution than the photographs, generally because they have a lot of small detail, which is quite important for people to view. And there's not a lot of point in putting up scans of maps if you can't actually view that detail. So we also have the capability to scan documents and books, and we have an example online here for you. And this is the oldest item in the Hawke's Bay collection. It's the minute book of the Taradale River Board from 1877 was when it started. Having a scan of this online like this not only makes it more accessible to people, but it also helps reduce the wear and tear on the original. And for more modern volumes that are typewritten, we can also add OCR to them so they become text searchable. So there's a lot of...
So have you scanned everything that you've received from all the councils you're...
No, it's a very long-term project to scan everything.
Just to do it. So how do you decide what you're going to scan and what you're not in the meantime?
We've got a scanning policy which sets some parameters around what we aim to do. There is a certain amount of value attached to age, but also what it is. So the minute books tend to have quite high informational value for people. In this particular case, we actually did it as a good example for your own collection of the sorts of things we can do.
It is our one here.
I'll just link it on that.
Yep.
When staff requests information or someone in the community requests that information, if it's scanned to them, we then put it online. So it's, as requests come in,
Yes.
it then gets put into the system.
So it's sort of done 2 different ways, part of an ongoing project as well as requested. So, we can also make video and audio files, as I mentioned earlier, and we've done this with a number of old films from the 1950s that we've digitised. We've also got a YouTube channel that we put these on, so we try to make the material as widely available as possible. The more places it is available, the more likely people are going to be able to find it and use it. The database itself is all indexed through Google as well, so if anyone does a search on something, it'll come up in there and direct them through to this. We also do online exhibitions periodically, and these reproduce key items from the collection to tell a story. Our most recent one is actually protecting the Herotanga Plains, and this came about from a folder, a presentation we did a while ago. Mike Adey came along with a folder that he had sitting under his desk for a while. And there was all sorts of wonderful documents in there, dating back to the 1910s, as well as recording information around earlier floods. And looking at it, we thought this would be a really good resource to make more available. So we processed it and catalogued it and went through and scanned everything and then picked out select documents to put online to tell the story of the flood protection works starting in 1867 going through to about 1970. And all of these pages here can be blown up or viewed, or you can follow links through to the original items themselves. In some cases it's 100 or so pages, so it's useful for people who want to know a lot more about it.
So this exhibition is actually up in Archive Central in Fielding on display at the moment. So we normally, depending on if a council's got something that they want us to do an exhibition on, it can come through requests, or we try and do 3 or 4 a year and just pick particular comments. And I understand that you've got your presentation
Yeah,
here.
we had them unsuccessfully attached to that wall, or temporary exhibition, it's
So-
falling down.
Yeah, we'll need to find a way that
Yeah.
you can display those better, I think.
It's certainly been an interesting way of getting material out to the public. But just to finish with, we do have one short clip here from 1987 from your collection, which is regarding flooding on the Esk River. We thought we'd just finish with something that was a bit more visual. In this case, it was taken from a VHS videotape.
What year?
Mm.
97.
1987, yeah. But at the moment, we've got over 130,000 items that are catalogued on the database, and these come from 315 different local government organisations, from some quite small rabbit boards through to great big city councils and catchment boards and places like that. And the earliest records that are currently catalogued are from 1862, and they go through to the 2000s. So they cover a huge chunk of time. There's still quite a lot of work ahead, a lot of things that still need scanning, as well as the ongoing work we'll be doing with your staff. Any other questions?
Yes, so, Mr. Chairman, so you said through 2000, is that what you just said?
Yes, that's right.
So this is intended to be just a historical archive, it's not a redundant storage capacity for current
Yes, that's right.
records of councils.
Mm.
So at what age do things transfer over to you guys?
According to the legislation, it's 25 years, but there's a lot of flexibility around that. If something's not being regularly used, but it needs to be kept as an archive, it makes sense to transfer it to archives rather than having it sitting on a shelf somewhere.
So what, have you got an idea what, well, probably a question for Mr. Drury, what costs have we avoided by making use of this facility, and what does it cost us per annum?
Yeah, there are cost savings, Mr. Chairman, but I haven't come with those at my fingertips. But we used to send this, all these documents to be archived over to Hamilton, to Crown, a Crown company or something, and that came at some considerable cost over the years. Whereas now we have, I don't think there's a huge cost saving, but we've got better access and the records are better looked after, I believe. So I think there's a quality gain.
We had to recreate the temperature-controlled area, and that would have cost us surely a large amount. I mean, there's different requirements for archiving now, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And this building must have cost them a fortune, and we're getting a total bargain, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are indeed.
A number of our councils actually had it in their annual plan to actually, and Tararoa District Council was one, and I think Rangitikei was looking at it as well, in terms of building their own repository, and I think they had a budget of between $200,000 and $300,000. So it's rather than just a cost saving, it's actually a cost avoidance for a lot of these councils as well. So collectively, we probably saved, if we were to look at doing our own purpose-built building, as individual councils, I would have said between $1.5 and $1.8 million worth of savings. Well, cost avoidance as such, by doing this facility together. We've got 7 councils involved in the repository, and they probably have between 300 and 500, depending on their size, of linear metres of records in there, or archives in there, at a cost of less than $50,000. With that, they've got a very much improved level of service. They've got dedicated staff, because what we also found by doing this project, we've actually built up some capability and capacity within our region around an archival skill base. A lot of our archivists were also our records officers, or they left, and it was very difficult to actually then replace like for like. So what we've done is, by employing these guys, we've really increased our capability within our regional council and outside of our region as well. So I think that's been really invaluable.
Councillor Dick and then Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for the presentation. It's very impressive. You've got capacity to handle more councils?
Yes,
Are you actively looking to increase the number of councils you serve?
Yep, there is obviously there are certain limits, but we have room to expand within our existing repository as well as further expansion with our existing building.
Yeah.
I think we're about 70% full on our current shelving, so there's plenty of room for bringing in more councils.
Possibly a question to the chairman, any or the CE, are any of the other Hawke's Bay councils considering going in there?
Yes, they are. The team here have presented to a couple of the councils, in some cases more than once, and I know that certainly both two larger TAs are certainly giving it some serious consideration to looking at how they may archive and be able to provide public access to their records.
Yeah, that's good, but not just from the principle of shared services, but personally, I would really like to think that we could access records from Napier City or Waira or whatever from the same facility.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I really like the central concept you've got, which is professionalising archiving, because everybody does a bit to themselves and generally do it very badly. Go to any organisation, no one can find the records, so I really like what you're doing, building all the capability around one. But my question comes back to the presentation. You said you're 100% of earthquake requirements. 100% of what?
In relation to the requirements of the building code.
Well, but the building code for a house, I would have thought for something like this, you would have had, I just think that depending on the use of the building, the standard needs to be, more the house goes over, you can replace a house. People who lose the household effects, that's sad, but if we lost these records, then, that's something more significant in my view. So I'm just wondering, is it to a higher standard? I think some buildings, like a fire station, need to be to a higher standard than the general building code. It needs to be the last building standing. I'd have thought yours needs to be the last building standing too.
Through you, Chair. I'm not an engineer, but when the project was being undertaken and we were doing some refurbishments in the building, it was certainly looked at that the facility needed to be earthquake strengthened, and because of the type of material that we've got in there and the loading capacity, etc., all of those factors were taken into consideration, and so there was some considerable work done to make us sort of compliant with the Act, but also in terms of the loading in the facility as well. I'm not sure if that answers your question sufficiently.
100% of what? When you told me 100% of what?
Well,
Code.
that's definitely code of compliant. We've definitely put some additional strengthening in to allow for that. So whether or not we've got that quite right in terms of 100%, I'm not sure that anything is 100% earthquake through.
The code of compliance is a minimum, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah.
Councillor Pike.
This is user pays, isn't it? So we as a council are paying you to do that storage. Are you generating any other income from any other ventures within the whole Archive Central?
Yes, some of the space that we're not presently using we've actually subleased out to other people for storage purposes. So that's provided a small supplement to our overall income.
I would say too that the more councils that are involved in this, there's no additional cost. The cost comes down as we go along. It's certainly, there's no profit margin in here. It's definitely done for local government, so we just run it at cost.
But as far as people in the community, they don't have to pay anything at all for.
There's a charge if they want us to do particularly in-depth research, but there's no charge just for accessing it, and they can request scans and we'll do those free of charge for them as well. So,
Councillor Scott.
The more councils you get involved in this, presumably the more staff you can employ, Will that merely be to keep up the volume of work? Will that be able to enable you to speed up your scanning?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah. why not?
The more councils that we'd have, we'd need to provide some additional resources to be able to deliver the service that we currently have. So that's, we employ students as well through the year, so when we have a particular, like your council come on, we'll employ 3 or 4 students to provide us with some assistance to get those online as quickly as we can. But the rate that we're growing, as the Chief Exec has outlined, I have had discussions with Napier City Council, with Hastings District Council. I've also done presentations to the Waikato LAS, who are quite keen, and some individual councils in terms of Thames Coromandel, Apotiki, Whakatane, and also Paeroa as well. So there's considerable interest. Sometimes they don't necessarily need repository as such because they have their own archival facility, and it's really about the database, but it's certainly something that is of real interest to not just our regions.
Further questions? Councillor Pipe.
From the visit we came down and saw you, there's another shared service that co-locates there. Can you tell us about that?
Through you, Chair. That's our debt management. So what we've done on behalf of all of our councils within our region is look at where we can actually have a facility to provide debt control throughout the region. So rather than have each of us looking for our ratepayers that haven't paid their rates bills, we've actually gone in collectively for that. So we've got two staff that are dedicated from the Archive Central building, looking at our debt on behalf of all of the region. It's going considerably well. I can't give you the exact figures of what it used to be to what it is now, but I know that there's been some cost savings, certainly by not using agencies to collect our debt on behalf of the councils, is by doing that themselves. By generating letters and getting communications out to people that have outstanding debt a lot quicker, and also it's a little bit more personal, and it's going considerably well. The other savings that I would say has been just some of the legal costs. They haven't, our guys can actually take it to the court process. They don't have to rely on agencies or even going to our lawyers. So there's lots of different areas where I believe that there's been savings made. And again, that's another service that we've looked at to other LASs as well.
Councillor Graham. Actually, I was confused at first when you started your presentation on that. That's actually debtor management, not debt management. We might be strong to do that, but I doubt if we would give away our debt management. But firstly, I just want to say that I'm very strong supporter of outsourcing to people such as yourself who are developing a specific expertise which just duplicating in all the provinces is just ridiculous. So well done to that. Just want to endorse Councillor Dick's point as well. There's a great fervour in our region at the moment about community service, shared services. So I would have thought Hastings and Napier especially would be very keen to partake in this as well. So good luck with them.
I might have missed this because I came in a little late and I apologise for that. But did you say you're in Fielding? You're based in Fielding? And when you're talking about code compliance, you're not in a house, are you? You'd be in some form of commercial building? Yeah. Okay. Right. And how do you deal with fire risk? I mean, you couldn't have sprinklers in a...
Sprinklers are pretty safe. They're safer than not having sprinklers.
Okay.
We have the items themselves are all most of them are housed in boxes, which provide some.
And it's very tsunami safe in Fielding too. So, any other questions? Someone happy to move we accept this report? Thank you, Councillor Graham. We have a second. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Anyone wish to speak? Put that motion. All those. Aye.
I really would like to congratulate them on such professional service. I think this is exciting. We used to have our records stored up in Hamilton. They had to be physically retrieved to access them. This has made this a whole, history available to people at a touch of a button. Okay, it's not all scanned yet, but it's progress getting there, and I think it's a huge step in being able to open up that history and the social history and the development of the area to everyone. So I was quite excited when I saw the facility. It was very professional and innovative thinking from the staff as far as providing really good equipment without actually sourcing someone else to think up how it works. So, there's some very good Kiwi ingenuity goes in there as well.
One comment there, I think you're especially to be congratulated going to Fielding, Our small towns like Fielding need a hand. I mean, if you think of something really innovative that we can put into Wairau, we would appreciate that because they need a hand.
Rather be in Fielding than Palmerston North.
You wish to speak, Councillor Hill?
I'd just like to thank you for your time today and your time when we came and saw you a month or two ago. I lose track of the weeks. And if I can suggest to Liz, our Chief Executive, if this can be, uptake of this service can be endorsed throughout our Napier, Hastings, Central Hawke's Bay, Wairau, then I'd certainly like to see that being encouraged first and foremost before the facilities filled up a little further afield, seeing as these are the people we represent here. So if it can be any assistance that can be done through here, I'd strongly like to encourage it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'll put that motion, and all those in favour please say aye. Contrary no. Carried. Thank you very much. Well done.